Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
My brother walked into the cafe like a man expecting applause, head high, chin forward, like he was still 17 and walking off the football field in slow motion with some girl's number in his back pocket. Same stupid smirk, same pressed confidence. The only thing that had changed was the price of his shoes and the shine of his damn Rolex, catching the light every time he moved his wrist like it was planned. I was behind the counter, grinding beans and minding my business. People like to pretend baristas don't listen, but we hear everything, especially the things not said. Garrett's entrance was a declaration, not a visit. He didn't come for coffee. He came for the spectacle of watching me pour it. Must suck, he said, not even waiting for a greeting, being a barista while I'm out here running a company. His voice was loud enough for the old couple at table 4 to glance up over their crossword puzzles. I just smiled. I always smile with Garrett. It's easier than explaining. Besides, this wasn't the time to talk. Not yet. What can I get you? I asked, as if he were just another customer and not the goddamn billboard of my childhood trauma. He looked around the cafe like it was a garage sale, full of cheap memories and broken dreams. Let's go with a grande vanilla latte. Extra hot. You guys still do art in the foam, or is that too fancy for your place? I nodded, punched it into the register, took his card, and watched the arrogant flick of his wrist as he tapped to pay. He leaned back on the counter, looking down at his phone like I didn't exist. That's how it always was with Garrett. I was the background noise to his life, the opening act nobody remembered. The espresso hissed. The milk frothed. My hands moved on instinct, the muscle memory of years spent making drinks for people who never looked me in the eye. But I was calm. Not just the fake kind. The deep kind that only comes when you already know how the story ends. He took his latte with a grunt of approval and walked to a table near the window. Sat down like he owned the damn sun. Then he looked up. His eyes caught mine for a second, and I gave him the same smile I always gave. The one that made him think he'd won. 10 minutes later, the cafe TV switched from some stupid real estate ad to breaking news. The anchor's voice dropped into that solemn, reverent tone they use for popes and disasters. A podium. A curtain. A stage. And then my face. I was standing under spotlights, a medal around my neck, shaking hands with people who had spent their entire lives trying to do what I'd just done. The screen behind me read, Nobel Prize for Physics, Elliot Brooks. There was a pause. A real one. You could have heard the goddamn espresso drip. Garrett looked up, latte halfway to his lips. His hand froze midair. His mouth opened just a little, not in awe, more like a glitch in a system that didn't know how to compute what it was seeing. And I just kept wiping down the counter. I didn't even look at the screen. I didn't need to. I knew every second of that speech. I'd written it 10 years ago in the back of a spiral notebook while sleeping on a couch I found on Craigslist. Around the cafe, people started murmuring. A woman at the register said, "Wait, that's you, right?" I gave her the same smile I gave Garrett. He didn't finish his latte. He stood up, looked at me, then looked back at the TV, like if he stared hard enough, he'd find a logical explanation for how his screw-up little brother ended up there. The guy he used to prank by locking him in closets. The guy whose science projects he used to take credit for. The guy he never once apologized to. Elliot, he said, like maybe I was just someone who happened to have the same name and face. I wiped my hands on a rag. Yeah? He didn't say anything else. And I didn't explain. Because how do you explain to someone that the reason you were never loud, never flashy, never fighting back, was because you were too busy building the weapon? He walked out in silence. No smartass comments. No smirks. No jokes. Just the bell over the door and the sound of applause from the cafe TV as the world clapped for me, for the first time, not him. And that right there was the moment I knew. This story wasn't about coffee. It wasn't even about the Nobel. This was about a war that had started 20 years ago. And nobody had even realized it had begun except me. So let's go back, shall we? To where it really started. To basements, betrayals, and blueprints no one believed in. Before I was a barista, before the Nobel, before the applause or the long, bitter silence that followed, I was a skinny, awkward 12-year-old spending most afternoons buried in a half-finished basement that smelled like mildew, solder, and old ambition. It wasn't a lab, not really, just a corner of the house where Dad stacked leftover drywall and Christmas boxes, a broken furnace humming like a dying animal in the background. But to me, it was a cathedral. A holy place of silence, of potential, of quiet genius, trying desperately to be heard in a home that only had room for one golden son. Garrett, of course, was that son. Tall early, fast with the football, fast with his mouth, fast with getting what he wanted. He wore attention like a tailored suit. He was the kind of kid teachers smiled at before he even raised his hand, the kind who never got grounded even when he deserved it, the kind who could crash mom's car and still walk out with a grin and dinner money. Everyone loved Garrett. Coaches, neighbors, Dad, especially Dad. Meanwhile, I was the kid who asked for books for Christmas. The one who'd rather dissect a microwave than watch a game. I didn't get picked first or second or at all. My favorite smell was isopropyl alcohol and the way burnt wire curled in your nose when you were working on something too hot, too fast. While Garrett was out making the world love him, I was building machines no one would ever see, asking questions no one at that kitchen table ever bothered to answer. They called it a phase. Even when I explained that I'd replicated a basic particle accelerator model using copper wire and a salvaged laptop fan, Mom would just nod and ask if I wanted more peace. Garrett once told a group of friends I was playing scientist downstairs, like I was some toddler pretending a broom was a sword. That moment stuck with me longer than I care to admit. Because it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. That casual dismissal, like I wasn't real. Like nothing I did could possibly matter. Ever had someone in your life write you off, treat you like a footnote in their success story? Drop a comment if you've been the Elliot in your family or the Garrett. The truth is, it was never about jealousy. I didn't want his life. I didn't care about touchdowns or talent shows or that god-awful school spirit week. I wanted understanding. Recognition, maybe. Not the kind that came with trophies or applause, but the kind that let me feel like what I was building mattered to someone other than me. But no one ever came down to that basement. No one ever asked what the wires were for. No one ever saw the diagrams that covered every inch of drywall like cracked blueprints for a world only I could see. Except once. I made the mistake of showing Garrett. It was the spring I turned 15, and I'd been working on something I called Project Lyra, a rudimentary clean energy converter that ran on a mix of solar and kinetic charge. Crude, inefficient, but theoretically revolutionary. I'd explained it to him one night when he came home drunk from a party, slurring about how our parents didn't know what greatness looked like. He sat on the steps, squinting at the wires and blinking like he couldn't believe I was using real tools. I remember thinking, just for a second, that maybe he saw me, maybe he understood. Maybe this was our turning point. 3 weeks later, he presented my design at the school science fair. His name on the placard. His smug face under the banner. My diagrams, unchanged, uncredited, and now spray-mounted to a poster board surrounded by plastic models and smiling judges. He even used my explanation word for word. Called it Garrett's Vision for a Sustainable Future. He didn't win first place. He won state. And then regionals. And me? I stood there in the back of the gym, wearing a sweatshirt with frayed sleeves, watching teachers I'd known for years clap him on the back like he'd cured cancer. Nobody even noticed me walk out. I don't remember getting home. I remember the cold, though. And I remember the silence of that basement, as if even the old furnace had stopped breathing. I didn't confront him. What would have been the point? He would have laughed, told me it was just an idea, that I should have protected it better, that if I were really that smart I wouldn't have let it get stolen in the first place. He always knew how to turn guilt into gold. So I went back downstairs. And I stopped sharing. I stopped hoping for praise. I stopped waiting for understanding. I built in silence. Resentment became fuel. I started thinking bigger, about systems, about failure points, about how even the strongest machines collapse when the wrong pressure is applied in just the right place. It wasn't just science anymore. It was strategy. It was survival. That science fair was the first betrayal, but it wasn't the last. It was just the one that taught me exactly who Garrett was. And more importantly, exactly who I'd need to become. College was supposed to be the great reset, the place where everything about high school dissolved into the rear view, and everyone got a shot at starting over. That's what the glossy brochures promised. Anyway, reinvention through debt, late-night ramen, and fluorescent-lit lecture halls full of kids pretending they had it all figured out. I didn't go to college to party or network or find myself. I went there to escape the gravitational pull of Garrett's shadow. Or at least, that's what I thought I was doing. But here's the thing about shadows, they stretch. They cling. And no matter how far you run, they always find you. Garrett had dropped out before he even finished his second year. Said college was a scam, said he could build a billion-dollar company with nothing but a laptop and caffeine. And the sick part? He actually did. I remember the day his first app hit TechCrunch. Something stupid about streamlining personal calendars for alpha personalities, basically a glorified to-do list wrapped in buzzwords and venture capital. But the press loved him. The same face that graced the football posters now grinned out from magazine covers with headlines like The Dropout Disruptor and How One Visionary Changed Silicon Valley. Meanwhile, I was sleeping in a shared studio with a radiator that coughed like a 2-pack-a-day smoker and a sink that wouldn't stop dripping. I was getting my PhD in applied energy systems, attending lectures by day and working night shifts tutoring undergrads who couldn't tell a capacitor from a crouton. I didn't resent the work. I liked the grind. I liked the idea that what I was building wasn't just another app, but something real, something that could actually change how the world consumed power, how we sustained ourselves. And then came the blueprint. It was a prototype I'd been shaping in secret, an experimental self-sustaining microgrid using modular nanoconductors and variable solar input. It wasn't perfect. Not yet, but it was close. Too close, maybe. I had this idiotic moment, late one night, where I thought, maybe now's the time. Maybe Garrett's finally matured. Maybe he'd want to invest, not steal. God, I was a fool. We hadn't spoken in months, but I reached out. Sent a message. Just a few slides. High-level stuff. No numbers, no schematics. I didn't even include my name on the file. But I should have known. I should have known that Garrett could smell blood in the water the second he opened it. Less than a year later, he unveiled GridLink, a revolutionary energy platform aimed at decentralizing power in rural and developing communities. The press lost its collective mind. A clean energy solution from a tech mogul who once said solar panels were overhyped backyard junk? It was the comeback narrative of the decade. His TED Talk went viral. The White House tweeted about it. Venture capitalists lined up like addicts waiting for a fix. And me? I sat on a folding chair in a windowless lab, watching it all unfold on a cracked laptop with 3 busted keys. Watching my diagrams behind his smug smile. Watching the world give him credit for something he didn't even understand, didn't even want to understand. He wasn't trying to change the world, he was just flipping the table and taking the chips. Again. That was the moment I stopped being sad about Garrett. Stopped wishing he'd see me. Stopped dreaming about the day he'd finally say, "You were right." That day was never going to come. Because Garrett wasn't just arrogant, he was dangerous. He was a taker. He didn't just steal ideas. He stole momentum. He stole futures. And if I didn't stop him, he'd burn through the entire planet before realizing he'd lit the match. So I disappeared. Not in the dramatic, cloak-and-dagger way, but quietly. I stopped answering emails. Deleted my social media. Moved out of my apartment in the middle of the night and left no forwarding address. I emptied my accounts and took the last of my research offline. My advisors thought I'd had a breakdown. My classmates thought I'd given up. Even Garrett probably thought I'd finally learned my place. Let them think that. Because while he was on stage taking bows, I was in a basement, again, rewriting everything. This time, I wasn't building for recognition. I was building for war. I was living in a shed behind a church in rural Vermont when the prototype finally held a charge for more than 24 hours, and I swear to God, it was the first time in years I'd cried without shame. The walls of the shed were warped with mildew, the roof leaked in 2 places, and my only source of heat was a salvaged space heater I rigged to run off a modified car battery. The only person who knew where I was lived 5,000 miles away and answered to a code name. But none of that mattered because I wasn't there for comfort or company or even safety. I was there for clarity. I was there to build something that would outlive my brother's ego and maybe, if I was lucky, burn it to the ground. When I disappeared, I didn't just vanish from public view. I deleted the version of myself that wanted approval. I stopped trying to prove I was smart enough, good enough, worthy enough to be taken seriously by the very people who never saw past my silence. I no longer cared if the academic world cited my papers or if my old professors wondered where I'd gone. The only thing I cared about now was truth, not the sanitized, patent-pending version that looked good in press releases, but raw, untamed truth that changed lives and scared governments. The idea had started with my original microgrid design, the one Garrett hijacked and turned into his performative, investor-friendly toy. But I pushed it so far beyond what I'd ever imagined that sometimes I stared at the blueprints and wondered if I'd lost my mind. The energy unit I'd created wasn't just efficient, it was autonomous, self-repairing, scalable. It didn't require a grid or a network or a tech CEO grinning in front of a TED banner. It could sit in the middle of a desert, untouched, and power an entire community for decades. But this time, I wasn't stupid. I didn't put my name on anything. I built it with encrypted, compartmentalized collaboration, activist scientists from Brazil, rogue engineers from Sweden, exiled physicists from Iran. We didn't ask permission. We didn't look for applause. We built under the radar, using scrap, using whatever we could smuggle through digital backdoors. And when a component failed, we didn't go to market. We rebuilt it ourselves, again and again. Until it didn't. I turned down investors. I turned down journalists. I turned down a former MIT colleague who showed up at my shed in the middle of a snowstorm offering me a spot on a panel that would have put me back on the map. I turned them all down because I didn't want the spotlight. I wanted Garrett to choke on the truth, alone, when it finally hit him that he wasn't the future, wasn't the innovator, wasn't even original. The prototype, when it finally worked, didn't hum or glow or announce its success with any fanfare. It just ran. It ran through the night, through the morning, through the next 2 days, charging devices, lighting the shed, and powering the heater that kept me from freezing in my sleep. It ran like it had been waiting its whole life to be born, like it knew it was real and final and unstoppable. And still, even then, I wished, stupidly, weakly, that Garrett would call. That he would find out, somehow, and instead of launching a counterbrand or writing a snide tweet or sending lawyers, he would just say it. One sentence. One apology. One acknowledgement that I had been there all along, right beside him, not beneath him. But of course, he didn't. What he did instead was give a keynote speech in Dubai about the danger of rogue tech and how unregulated systems threaten the stability of progress. I watched him on a flickering laptop screen in a damp cafe with a dozen hackers sipping espresso, and when he said some innovations must be controlled to be safe, I laughed so hard I nearly threw up. It was then I decided to send the video. Not to Garrett, he wouldn't open it. Not to the press, they wouldn't believe it. I sent it to the Nobel Committee, anonymously, with nothing but footage of the unit running under extreme conditions, test data, time logs, and proof of sustainability far beyond anything published or patented. No manifesto. No name. Just evidence. I expected nothing. Maybe some intern would file it away. Maybe it'd be buried. But 3 weeks later, I got the encrypted message, "We would like to verify your submission. Confidentiality guaranteed. Nobel Physics Committee." I didn't reply right away. I walked into the woods instead and stood under bare trees with snow falling in sheets around me, and I thought about every moment that had brought me there. Every basement light. Every ignored idea. Every time someone laughed when I said energy could be clean and free. I wasn't building for revenge anymore. I was building for the end of an empire. And now, the door was finally open. The day they flew me to Stockholm, I sat in the back row of the plane, eyes fixed on the tiny flickering screen that showed our altitude, pretending not to hear the stewardess asking if I wanted sparkling water or still. My hands were in my lap, thumbs pressed so tight they left bruises on each other, not from fear of flying, but from the unbearable weight of what was coming. People think winning the Nobel Prize is a fantasy that feels like a dream. What they don't tell you is that it feels more like a funeral when the person you were dies the moment they announce your name. They said my work had changed the landscape of sustainable energy, had redefined the potential of independent power systems, had lit a spark in parts of the world left in the dark for too long. Those were their words, carefully curated in press kits and headlines, filtered through the mouths of men who couldn't read my blueprints if their lives depended on it. I stood there under a chandelier the size of my old apartment, with cameras snapping like gunfire, and I shook the hands of royals and dignitaries, all of whom smiled like they knew me when they'd never even heard of me 6 months earlier. They gave me the medal. They gave me the certificate. They gave me a platform to speak, and I used it not to celebrate but to remind the world that innovation doesn't belong to the wealthy or the loud. It belongs to the desperate, the invisible, the ones who build in silence with no promise of reward. I didn't name Garrett. I didn't have to. He was in every word I didn't say, in every pause between sentences, in the way I looked at the crowd and thought of the one person who wasn't there and never would be. They flew me back with honors. They offered me professorships, consulting deals, brand partnerships with companies that had once ignored my grant applications. I turned down all of it. Instead, I walked back into the cafe on the corner of Tremont Street, put on an apron, and picked up the morning shift like nothing had happened. The same coffee beans, the same mop bucket, the same leaky faucet behind the counter that hadn't been fixed in months, because I wasn't done yet. Not until he saw. Not until I saw him see it. Garrett always came in on Thursdays, right around 9:30, after his jog, when the city was still half asleep and he could stroll in like he owned the place. That day, he came in on schedule, phone in hand, sweat drying on his temples, sunglasses pushed back into his perfect hair. And he didn't notice me at first. Not until I called out his order from behind the machine. Not until he turned and saw my face. His step faltered. Just slightly. The phone in his hand dipped. And for the first time in my entire life, he didn't say anything immediately. No insult. No joke. No condescending smirk. He just walked slowly to the counter and stared at me like I was someone he didn't quite recognize anymore. "You're back," he said finally, voice thin and uncertain, like he wasn't sure if this was real or just some twisted dream his ego had cooked up. "I never left," I answered, sliding the cup toward him. My voice was steady, but my fingers twitched slightly on the counter's edge, a betrayal of nerves I thought I'd buried. He looked at the cup, then back at me, then up at the mounted TV above the pastry case. The screen had frozen for a moment, an old news clip looping because the Wi-Fi in the building was trash, but it was enough. Enough to show the medal. The speech. My name. He blinked. Once. Twice. Then looked away like the sight of it burned. And still, he didn't say congratulations. He didn't say anything. He just took the cup, walked to the window seat, and sat down, staring out as if the street outside held some secret he was trying to decode. I watched him drink. 1 slow sip. 2. And then he just left it there half full, and walked out without looking back. It should have felt like victory. It should have felt like closure. It should have healed something inside me, sealed off an old wound, stopped the voice in my head that still whispered I wasn't enough. But it didn't. It felt like standing in an empty theater after the final curtain call, alone in the dark, listening to the silence where the applause should have been. Because that's what no one tells you about revenge. It doesn't fix the thing you lost. It doesn't rewind time or change the shape of what they took from you. It just sharpens your edges until you can't tell whether you're cutting others or just yourself. The Nobel was the prize, yes. But it came with poison too. And now that I had it, I couldn't stop wondering which one of us would die from it first. For about a week after the Nobel announcement aired in every corner of the internet, I couldn't walk more than 2 blocks without someone stopping me for a photo, a handshake, or a question they'd rehearsed in their head all morning and were now too nervous to actually say. I'd nod, thank them, pretend it didn't feel strange to be seen so brightly after being invisible for so long. And it did feel strange, almost like wearing a stranger's skin, walking around in someone else's spotlight with a smile that didn't quite fit my face anymore. I wasn't built for fame. I didn't want it. The medal went into a drawer, next to old schematics and half-burned notebooks that had meant more to me than 1,000 interviews ever could. I gave one press appearance and then vanished again, back into the quiet spaces where the world didn't try to turn me into a brand. Because it was never about the glory. It wasn't even about the award. It was about being heard, just once, just enough. But you can't step into the fire without catching some of the heat. And Garrett? He caught all of it. The backlash came fast and hard, like a tidal wave wrapped in headlines. Investors started asking questions about the origins of his so-called revolutionary grid-link platform, particularly after a few clever internet sleuths began matching its design patterns with old, time-stamped fragments of my research that had somehow survived in obscure online forums and buried university archives. I didn't leak them, someone else did. Probably one of the activists I worked with, or maybe one of the programmers still bitter about getting booted from Garrett's beta team without compensation. Stock dropped. Lawsuits were whispered. Journalists started using words like intellectual theft and fraudulent representation with alarming casualness on prime-time broadcasts. His PR team scrambled to throw together vague statements and distraction campaigns, but the damage was already there, and it was deep. For the first time, people weren't laughing with Garrett. They were asking where all his genius had gone. Meanwhile, I received emails from half the world, scientists, students, climate activists, anarchists, CEOs, and strangers writing from rooftops powered by rigs I'd helped design. They called me a pioneer, a prophet, a ghost-turned-savior. I didn't respond to most of them because every word that praised me still felt like it should have been aimed at someone else. I wasn't a hero. I was just a kid who never got over the pain of being ignored by his own family. And then came the twist I didn't see coming. A journalist, digging into my past with more precision than I thought possible, uncovered a web of anonymous donations and back-end funding tied to protests in Southeast Asia, sabotage efforts in oil fields in Africa, and the sudden appearance of open-source energy cells in refugee camps across multiple continents. She called it a movement. She called me the architect of a silent revolution. She said I was destabilizing the energy economy one hacked blueprint at a time. The article went viral within hours. Suddenly, I wasn't just the guy who won the Nobel. I was the dangerous genius with a messiah complex, the vigilante scientist waging war against global industry from the shadows. People either loved it or hated it. There was no in-between. The irony was, most of it was true. I had funneled resources through underground channels. I had helped build things in places no government would touch. But not for chaos. Not for revenge. For the same damn reason I started doing this in the first place, because people deserved light, warmth, and freedom without paying a lifetime's worth of debt for it. But truth doesn't matter when the story sells better with sharp edges. I stopped going out in public. I turned off my phone. I pulled the curtain shut in the cafe and started working night shifts instead of mornings. Customers started asking questions, whispering behind half-drunk cappuccinos. Is it true? Is he dangerous? Did he really fund that uprising in Lagos? I never answered. I just made their drinks and moved on. Then one morning, just before dawn, I opened the cafe's mail and found a plain white envelope with no return address, hand-delivered, no stamp. Inside was a single sheet of paper. From the offices of Garrett Brooks, CEO of Lumicore Technologies. Legal action for intellectual property theft and damages. He was suing me. The bastard was actually suing me. After stealing my work, slandering my name, writing my ideas into boardrooms and Forbes covers and five-star hotel suites, Garrett had finally decided to strike back. Not in person. Not in some brother-to-brother confrontation where things might get messy or emotional. But in court, where he could wrap his intentions in legal jargon and try to erase me the same way he had when we were kids, quietly, efficiently, and with just enough plausible deniability to come out looking like the victim. I stared at that paper for a long time. Didn't move. Didn't speak. Just let the weight of it settle into my bones like concrete. This wasn't about winning anymore. It wasn't even about being right. This was about survival. And I knew right then that the latte was just the beginning. The real war was coming. The courtroom smelled like wood polish and old anger, the kind of sterile place where history gets rewritten by the hour and truth is just another weapon passed between men in suits. I sat on one side of the room in a borrowed blazer 2 sizes too big and a tie I hadn't worn since grad school interviews, while Garrett sat on the other, flanked by attorneys whose cufflinks probably cost more than my entire student loan debt. He looked calm, collected, bored even, like this was just another meeting in a long line of hostile acquisitions. To him, it probably was. The media called it the Trial of Brothers, which sounded like a cheap Netflix drama or some Shakespearean rerun, but the truth was uglier and far less poetic. This wasn't about family. It wasn't even about justice. It was about control, about who got to own the story that had been festering between us since we were children. Garrett wanted to rewrite the narrative before it slipped too far out of his grasp, and dragging me into court was his way of putting his boot back on my throat. His lawyers went first, of course. They painted me as a bitter, unstable academic who'd gone rogue, who'd used underground networks to distribute unlicensed technology, who had a vendetta so deep it threatened the global market. They cherry-picked quotes from years-old emails, presented partial schematics, and called them circumstantial evidence, dug up every scrap of doubt they could find. They even brought in a psychologist to question my motives, to hint that I might be suffering from some kind of delusional complex rooted in sibling inferiority. I sat through it all without speaking, my expression a blank page they couldn't write on. When it was our turn, my attorney, a wiry woman with no patience for theatrics, started slow and soft, like winding up a punch. She laid out the timeline of my original designs, pulled receipts from storage drives and timestamps from email chains, even brought in 2 whistleblowers from Garrett's company who testified, under oath, that they'd seen my blueprints long before Garrett's so-called breakthrough. The moment one of them said, "Yeah, we knew it wasn't his," I watched a muscle twitch in Garrett's jaw, the first sign that maybe he realized he wasn't untouchable after all. But it wasn't a clean fight. It never is in court. Evidence was thrown out. Motions were filed. Judges whispered to clerks behind raised folders. And every time we seemed close to tipping the scales, Garrett's team would find some new technicality, some new distraction. They were trying to exhaust me, to bury me in bureaucracy until I broke. And still, I didn't. Because I didn't need the gavel to come down in my favor. I didn't need the headlines to say, "Elliot wins." I'd already won where it counted. The world had seen me. The work had spoken louder than I ever could. Whether the courtroom believed it didn't matter, my tech was already out there, running in villages, fueling protests, breaking chains. But something cracked in me anyway. Somewhere in the middle of week 3, During a long recess when the fluorescent lights were buzzing louder than the voices in the gallery, I looked at Garrett and saw not my brother, but a stranger who had worn my last nerve down to the bone. A man who didn't even remember the first thing he stole from me. A man who would keep taking until there was nothing left. I leaned into my lawyer and said, "Settle it. I don't want the circus anymore." She blinked. "Are you sure? We're close." "I don't care," I said, my voice flat and certain. "He wants a performance. I'm done giving it to him." And so we did. We reached a confidential settlement. No admission of guilt. No transfer of intellectual rights. Just a quiet handshake in a conference room where the windows didn't open and the coffee tasted like sawdust. Garrett signed without looking at me. Then he stood, adjusted his jacket, and left without a word. Just like that. The reporters hounded me for comments afterward. Why settle? Do you regret not pushing for a win? Is this an admission? I said nothing, just walked past the flashing cameras and the microphones on sticks out into the cold, gray street where the wind didn't ask questions and the pavement didn't care about headlines. People think winning means walking away with your head high and your fists raised, but real victories don't look like that. Sometimes they look like walking away with nothing but your silence intact, knowing that you didn't become the thing you were trying to destroy. But I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel free. I felt hollow, like something inside me had broken off and fallen into a place I'd never be able to reach again. Because the truth is, you can win the war and still lose the parts of yourself that mattered most. And as I stood on the courthouse steps, hands in my pockets, wind cutting through the collar of my coat, I realized I wasn't smiling. I wasn't celebrating. I was just standing there, empty, while everyone else decided what my story would be. The espresso machine hisses like it's breathing its last, steam curling in the air above a stained countertop I've wiped clean 1,000 times and still never managed to make shine. Morning light creeps in through the narrow window above the sink, yellow and indifferent, casting long shadows across the cafe like ghosts that never left. I've been here since 5, just like every other Thursday, and there's comfort in the repetition, in the weight of the same old tasks done the same old way, even if no one's left to appreciate the consistency. The cafe hasn't changed much in the last year, not since the trial, not since the headlines stopped and the attention cooled like coffee left on the burner too long. Some of the regulars still trickle in, mostly the quiet ones who don't care about gossip or global energy conspiracies, who only want their drinks hot and their mornings unbothered. They don't ask me about Garrett. They don't mention the Nobel. They don't point at the TV when my face flashes across it in some rerun interview from a year ago. They just nod, tip their change into the jar, and take their lattes to go. Garrett's gone now, left the country after the settlement, supposedly starting over in Singapore or maybe Zurich, depending on which blog you believe. The company's a ghost, restructured, sold in parts, renamed a few times by people who never cared about its origin anyway. Last I heard, he was trying to launch something in biotech, still chasing relevance like a dog chasing headlights. We haven't spoken since the day of the handshake. We probably never will again. Our parents are gone too, Dad from a stroke he never saw coming, and Mom a few months after, like her body just couldn't figure out how to keep going without someone to keep it moving. I wasn't there for either funeral. I sent flowers, paid the bills, and stayed home. Garrett handled the rest. Or maybe he didn't. I never asked. I never wanted to know. The Nobel medal sits in a drawer beneath the register, wrapped in the same felt it came in, untouched since the night I came home, and placed it there like something you're not sure whether to frame or forget. People think awards fix something, that once you're recognized by the world, all the old wounds seal up and stop bleeding. But the truth is, it's just a heavier burden to carry around, proof that you were good enough all along, and no one ever noticed until it was too late. I don't go on speaking tours. I don't do panels. I turn down invitations weekly from universities, conferences, green tech startups, all of them asking for a few words from the genius who changed the world and vanished. They call me a recluse. A philosopher. A cautionary tale. They always want me to explain why I walked away when I was finally at the top. And I always ignore the emails because the answer's too simple and too painful to say out loud. I didn't walk away. I just never left. This cafe is where I belonged all along. Not because I love coffee, though I do, or because I need the job, though the bills don't pay themselves, but because this is the only place in the world where no one ever asked me to be anything more than what I already am. It's the only place where I get to build something with my hands, serve something warm, offer something small and human without it becoming part of someone else's headline. This morning, I make one last cup before the rush starts. Just for me. No orders behind it. No cameras. No expectations. I steam the milk to the exact temperature I like, pull the shot with a touch of bitterness, just enough to remind me the world still has teeth. I sit by the window where Garrett used to take his calls, where I once wiped down the glass while the whole city learned who I really was. The TV in the corner flickers on automatically with the morning feed. An old interview plays, the one I gave just before disappearing again. My voice sounds steadier than I remember. My face is calm, older. I watch it like a stranger, like someone who maybe lived this life, but doesn't recognize the man who lived it anymore. In the clip, I say something about justice. About truth. About not waiting for permission to do what you know is right. I sound like I believe it. Maybe I did. Maybe I still do. But watching it now, the words feel like an echo in an empty house, bouncing off the walls and losing meaning before they reach the door. I sip the latte. It's perfect. Quiet. Warm. Slightly bitter. Just the way I like it. And for a moment, I let myself say the thing I've never said aloud, not even once, not to Garrett, not to anyone, not even to the mirror. I never wanted to humiliate him. Not really. I just wanted him to look at me and say, "You did good, little brother." But he never did, and maybe that's the real reason I'll never stop making coffee.